Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today I want to talk about failure and magic, more specifically, I guess the correlation of failure and magic, or the idea that failure is magic and can be used as magic. Failures in all regards. So we're going to get into that. Taz is here as a bit of a guest star. He's slumping over. I don't think he wants to kind of nap, but for anybody who wanted to see Taz, I know I had spoken, or I was in a live chat with Anna from Anna at Astro Lady Tarot, and Jen from Science Sissel Tarot with Jen, and Kelly Bear, and they'd all mentioned wanting to see Taz or see my dog. So this is Taz, everyone. You could say hi to him. He really wants to take a nap, I think. It's a stormy day. There's a tropical storm coming through, actually, so it makes him, I think that it's nighttime, so he's more inclined to sleep. He's a miniature poodle, by the way. I'll let him go nap now. Alright, I'm back, everyone. I laid Taz down for his nap. He's like a little baby, especially in this weather, so you literally just lay him down on the couch and he goes to sleep. And I took off my fleece because it was getting a little bit warm. But I'd like to get into the idea of the magic that can be found in failure, or the magic that we can do as magical practitioners with failure. I mean literal magic. More so of like a high magic sort of sense, where we are impacting change within ourselves that's going to have these outward effects, but magic nonetheless. So I'd like to get into that. Magic being very much tied to the Seven of Discs in the Thoth Tarot. This was actually not my card of the day, but I'm going to get into my card of the day in just a second because it does tie in with a failure that I've had that I think is a great example. But I'd also like to invite anybody watching this. I'm going to make it a hashtag. I think it would be nice to know a little bit more about these failures that are less glamorous, things that we don't acknowledge so much, but that we can really learn from and do something with. I think there's a power in acknowledging, owning up to, and feeling unashamed of our failures and the power that that can grant us. So if you're watching this and you feel called to do so, I'm going to, I think, do a hashtag called failure magic. So yeah, if you want to make a video response, or you can just let me know in the comments if you feel comfortable doing so. I'd love to know some of your failures. I'm going to get into a few of my own. I think this is just a fun idea. I've lately been feeling very tired, less so in a physical sense, more so in an emotional and mental sense, just drained, uninspired, and it actually has had some physical effects just in terms of me feeling bleh and just affecting my rhythms and everything to do with my body. I think that my body is like a barometer for what's going on inside of me. When I'm emotionally or mentally drained or anything's going on, my body very physically reflects that. So that's also very interesting to take note of. But a failure I'd love to speak on is my daily draw today, which was the Four of Swords. Now, I began to... Yes, the Four of Swords. I began to journal on this, and I realized almost towards the end of the journaling that I had read the excerpts on the Two of Swords in various books, and I was writing as if I were writing on the Two of Swords, and instead of trying to fix what I was doing and maybe crossing it out and starting over, I decided to acknowledge and accept this as a failure. But a failure that can be really wonderful. I think that just even calling it a failure and feeling okay with it at the same time, there's a power in that it cannot stop me, that I'm unashamed, that I don't tie it to my sense of self and my worthiness or my capabilities. It doesn't reflect any less on me. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad reader. It doesn't mean any of that. Actually, because I acknowledged it as a failure, I was able to continue journaling on the Two of Swords, which I think was so important for me and part of why I'm making this video. My moon is in Libra. For those who may or may not know, the Two of Swords relates to the moon in Libra, and I was actually journaling on my moon sign and my internal self and how I was feeling, as I just said, feeling a bit tired and uninspired and worn out. And I think if I hadn't acknowledged what I was doing as a failure and continued on regardless, just because, I would have started over and journaled on the Four of Swords, and I would not have reached the same conclusions. I wouldn't have allowed myself to have reached the same conclusions. And that I would say, yeah, I would have censored myself because there would have been some aspect of me that didn't want to accept the idea of failure or a mistake. And because I accepted it and really just internalized it and became okay with it, I was able to proceed and reach conclusions magically so. And it felt magical to me. It felt like these epiphanies. And it's all because I was okay with the idea of failure. Likewise, I failed my depth year. This was something I spoke about in a while back, and I even said, I think in the video, that I wasn't calling it a failure, and I think that that was a mistake. I think that consciously and verbally deciding to not acknowledge it as a failure was me not wanting to own up to the fact that it was a failure. I didn't want to view it as such. I didn't want to come across as somebody who was incompetent or have a poor reflection of myself based on an action I said I was going to take but couldn't see through to the end. And that's okay. It's okay that I failed. And I'm acknowledging it now. I have acknowledged it to myself in recent weeks. And because of that, because I have dredged it up, I've done a bit of a spring cleaning in terms of my failures, I was able to reach some really wonderful conclusions about myself and make changes and take action based on those conclusions. So I actually have a box right to my right of decks that I am purging or cleaning out of my collection. I think that it took me acknowledging the failure of my depth year to even feel okay with getting rid of decks that I wasn't using. Now, I'm totally okay with being seen as and feeling like a collector. I know that I do collect decks, but at the same time, I collect decks to be able to use them. And if I don't think I'm going to use them, if they're sitting there for weeks on end and I have no desire to touch them, I don't see a point in keeping them. That's just me. And I think that I wasn't acknowledging that, and I wasn't actually making changes based on that aspect of myself because of my holdups and my lack of acknowledging the failure that was my depth year. And through doing so, now I am purging or getting rid of all of these decks. I don't know what I'm going to do with them just yet. And I'm really evaluating how I'm interacting with my material world, the meaning there. I think I was feeling just so unfulfilled and lackluster in terms of all of the materiality around me and the acquisition of material goods and not having any sort of happiness to equate with the acquisition. I wasn't feeling better. I wasn't feeling happier or more accomplished through acquiring these things and interacting with them. But I think now that I feel like I have fewer things, I'm more excited to interact with what I do have. It's ignited this excitement within me to use the items as they were intended and use them to find happiness through them as opposed to happiness in them. So the happiness is in me. I'm going to use those things as tools to engender that happiness, and I'm not going to turn to the thing itself to, I would say, manufacture or be the reason for my happiness. And with so many things, so many items, I think it was getting in the way of me doing that. And now that I have acknowledged a failure, I'm able to do that. I think I had been brushing failures into, or like shoving them in a closet, and not working with them. I think that, yes, it's all well and good, and we say that failures are learning points and stepping stones, and all of that's true, but they can only be learning points and stepping stones if we acknowledge them. If we choose to just say, I messed up, I failed, move on with life, you're not learning so much from that, I would say. I think when you look to investigate and you really internalize and you stop feeling shame because you allow yourself to move on from the shame equated with a failure or whatever dark feeling it arises within you, when you look at that, when you look it in the eye and you dispel it, you dismiss it as in sending it on its way, very, you know what I mean, not dismissing it as in just pushing it back under, but really dismissing it, that's when we can start to interact with failure in terms of it being a learning point and stepping stone. So for me, yeah, my depth year was always a failure, but I wasn't going to learn from it until I acknowledged it fully as such and interacted with the feelings that I associated with that failure. And having done so, there's a sort of alchemization within me that has allowed for a lot of changes to take place within me and outside of myself. The changes outside of myself happening because I've allowed myself to investigate things inside of me. And I think it's really beautiful and wonderful. I'm happy that I'm doing this. And it started a chain reaction of sorts. And I have another failure that is this notebook. And I spoke on this very briefly a few months back in wanting to show it. It was supposed to be this very artistic and well thought out notebook where I was writing all my ideas on all of the cards in here. And I began to work on it. I'll show you a little bit of what I've done. I've done actually some cool things in here, it feels like. So I have this tree of life, and I made this. I did this all by hand, wrote it out, paper cutters, art paper. There's that. I wrote about all of the various sephira here, and in between I started to do all of the Hebrew letters for all of the cards. I hand drew all of it and all of that, and measured all these things, and wrote the English translations. And I even began writing on some of the cards. So I only wrote really on the Fool, but I mapped out up until the Emperor. And I thought this was going to be the greatest thing, but I bit off more than I could chew. And really, I have no inclination to work on this, none, and I haven't for many months. I'm not going to throw it out, but I'm viewing it as a failure, and I think that me feeling a pressure of some sort in the back of my mind to work on this, or that I should be working on this because I'd put so much effort into it and all of that, it was holding me back. It was holding me back because I wasn't I wasn't accepting it for what it was, that I just had no inclination to work on it, that it was a bit of a failure, that I bit off more than I could chew, that it was a failure. I wasn't acknowledging that, and that was part of the problem for me, and it was stopping me from working on projects in a very, what feels like subconscious way. I wouldn't actively acknowledge the journal or think about it every day, but it was always something that would reoccur, and the worry of it, I think, got in the way of starting new projects and feeling able to start new projects. There was a guilt in not having finished something and starting something new despite having not finished it. And once I decided to accept it as a failure and work through the feelings associated with, say, starting something and not finishing it, or feeling, I would say, not up to the task, once I finally worked through those things, I freed up a lot of mental space for myself to feel open to new projects around me. The same way that getting rid of decks is making me feel more alive and excited to work with decks that I currently have and feel very passionately about working with. And so these are some of my failures that I think are allowing for a lot of magical change to take place in my life. They're not glamorous. They're the side of things that I don't think many of us, myself included, show to the public or show on YouTube very often, just because who wants to see a notebook that only has a few pages and never gets finished? Or who wants to see somebody who is speaking on who has failed their depth year? I don't think any of us get excited to make videos like that. I know I don't. But here I am today just wanting to come on and speak to these failures and the wonderful magic for me that has happened because of my acceptance and acknowledgement of them. And I've had a day of really just pulling all of those dismissed and brushed aside failures out of the closet, so to speak, ones that I really wasn't acknowledging and accepting, and working through them and just allowing myself to see them as failures and then moving forward accordingly. And now I would say feeling like I have the power over them as opposed to them having held some power over me previously. So it's really like reclaiming my own power through the acceptance of these as failures. And that's magic. It's like I'm gaining a part of myself back that I didn't even know was missing. And all of it started with the acknowledgement of a very small failure in my daily journaling. Seeing and writing about the Two of Swords when I really had pulled the Four of Swords, and thinking about, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to start over and read all these other excerpts and write about the card that I'd actually pulled, or do I want to continue with what I'm doing, accept that I messed up and failed, and see where it takes me? And I chose to do that, and it spiraled and became this whole big thing for me in a really wonderful way. So I hope that this was helpful, and I'd really love to see some responses about the magic that all of you potentially have gotten out of failures. and what they've done for you and where they've led you on a winding path of life. I hope you are all well. Until next time, bye.